Welcome to Overcoming Barriers in Tech. Very, very excited to be here, part of Tech Skills Day. My name is Aisha Blake. I am Director of Developer Relations for Pluralsight, and I am joined by three lovely panelists. Thank you so much for joining me. If y'all wouldn't mind kind of introducing yourselves, kind of approaching and talking about how you're approaching this conversation of identifying and overcoming some of those barriers, that would be fantastic to start us off. Corey?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name's Corey Weathers. I have the privilege of being one of the two people who lead developer relations at Auth0 by Okta. When I heard the talk topic overcoming barriers for entry into tech, I kept thinking, one, about my own experience. I got into tech many years ago when there were very few Black and brown folks, and I had some people who helped me along the way. And so I'm glad that I'm in a position where I can help other people do the same. But then the other side to this is I'm really looking forward to just leaning into this conversation and learning from you all. I've had the chance to chat with you a little bit before, and so I'm really excited about this.
Hey y'all, my name is Paris Chandler. So I'm founder and CEO of Black Tech Pipeline, which is a job board newsletter and recruiting platform centering Black technologists. I really resonate with this conversation just because I'm a boot camp grad myself, and I came into tech, and right before that I was a wax specialist. Like, I waxed body hair full time, and I learned to code in 8 weeks, and then I broke into the industry. So yeah, I'm just excited to talk about like equitable routes to an education and your experiences, obviously, in this space.
Hi everyone, I'm Jessica Tai. I work at Airbnb as an engineering manager, and I also volunteer at a nonprofit called Students Rising Above as a curriculum developer and teacher there for getting students from underprivileged backgrounds more exposed into tech and just opening their eyes into an area that they might not have seen before. I'm really excited about talking with all of you because even though I have a computer science degree, it did not start off that way. Changed my majors many times, and I really stuck with it because I found a community of supportive people. And I think really find the people that can empower you and inspire you is what you need to get started in tech, because it is a daunting area to get into the first time.
Right.
Absolutely. And just kind of to bring it all back, I am resonating with like pieces of each of your stories. My career started in a coding boot camp, and honestly, even before that, as a volunteer, teaching people to code, teaching women to code specifically. And that experience has really colored my entire career. And it feels sort of like a full circle moment now to be working for a company like Pluralsight, where there is such a focus on upskilling and maintaining your skills, education, and ultimately equitable access to that education to give people the skills that they need to continue to improve their careers. So I think we've already sort of touched on some of the barriers that folks hit when they enter the industry, not seeing themselves in the people that are sort of presented to them, in terms of sort of the leaders, especially, that they see in the industry. What are some barriers that maybe we don't talk about enough?
I think one, so thinking about like being a boot camper, a barrier that I experienced was trying to get a job, but getting through the interview process, even after telling them, like, I'm a boot camper, this is what I learned within my boot camp. This is an accelerated program, so I'm not in school for 4 years. But they still tailored their interview process around someone who would have a computer science degree. It was so difficult overcoming that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk kind of throughout the conversation, both from the perspective of somebody who is joining the industry, but also from the perspective of a company that is trying to make their processes more equitable, and more open to folks of varying levels, and hopefully several other parts of their identity. So when we're talking about tailoring an interview process to a specific type of background. What are some pitfalls that you've seen people fall into? And this could be for anyone. What are some pitfalls you've seen people fall into, and what are some ways that you've seen people mitigate that tendency?
Yeah, one of the things that this question is hitting super timely because I'm in the process right now of working with my leadership team to revamp the way we interview folks and how we bring folks onto the team. And there are a number of biases that are just inherent in how we show up, right? There's obviously unconscious bias and what people can acknowledge around their unconscious bias. But then there's also like the historical bias of, well, every time we interview, we always do the interview a certain way. Or there's the subjective bias of, oh, I think this person is fantastic just because they happen to either speak the same language you do, because sometimes we do these interviews in different languages, or they tell stories in similar ways we do. Obviously, I do this for developer relations. And so some folks say, oh, it really resonated with me. Whereas other folks will say, I had no idea what they were talking about. And then that opinion gets dismissed. And so some of the things that we've been working on very intentionally to help avoid the pitfall of, well, we've got this unconscious bias or this conscious bias of hiring for the mold that we already have on the team, hiring for the way that our team already does this work. One of the ways that we're trying to combat that is by saying, okay, well, let's define what those skills are that we're trying to assess, whether they are the tangible skills of can this person code or the what I call intangible skills of how do they convey a message. And let's use that in a very a less subjective, but a much more data-driven way to have an honest conversation. Not necessarily to drive the outcome, but to have an honest conversation about how this person's strengths and opportunities for growth show up in the interview process. That's a hard thing to do, which is why we're still revamping it, but it's necessary.
Yeah. Something, I have a client, the way he interviews, so he doesn't look at like your educational background. It's more so, do you have these skills? Cool. What he does is he'll pay you for a week-long interview process to actually like work with him. Like we'll build this project together, or you'll help me with, one of my client projects. And it's just so that they can see, how do you collaborate? How can we work together? How do you view things? How does it differentiate from how we do things? And how are you really contributing and making sure that we're both a good fit for one another? Yeah. I actually love that. And the fact that he's paying his interviewees because it's taking time out of their day, right? So I think that's really cool. I do find like there's an issue there where if someone's interviewing with him while still having a full-time job, that's where it's like a little more difficult.
Yeah, I love that. At Airbnb, we're piloting things not as great as that, but trying to make it so it's not focused on, can you crank out this problem in 45 minutes on a whiteboard that maybe you've done in school already, but having things that are more pair programming, take home, do a pull request review, things a little bit more practical to the day-to-day, and then you can pick and choose which one resonates with you, your schedule, and elect to do that for your interview for evaluating coding.
Well, it takes so long to interview, right? Like, if you think about this, like from a candidate's perspective, an interview could span over a course of time, like weeks, whereas they're really only spending hours talking to the company themselves, right? But then from the company's perspective, they're doing this for so many different people. And so that amount of time it takes to interview folks is both incredibly too long, but also it feels a little bit too short. So I love changing the way in which we interview and assess whether someone is the right fit for an opportunity.
What's really interesting about that to me is that there's this element of giving this person who is in a vulnerable state already, before they even speak to you, some agency over the process, allowing them to say, this is what works for me, this is how I work, this is what I can bring to you, and then evaluating them fairly based on that, and sort of building that into the process from the get-go. That's, I think, one of the better ways I've seen people kind of tackle that issue of like, there are some formats that are going to be amazing for some people. And it's just, I have yet to see a single process that is going to work super, super well for everyone. If there were such a thing, we would all be using it. But being able to say, that doesn't work for me for whatever reason, and to have an equally trusted way to evaluate someone, even so, like that feels like at least the right direction to me.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I think about the 45-minute interview, right? Not because 45 minutes is the ideal time frame, more because the question I would ask is that the right amount of time for both you to interview someone for an opportunity and for them to interview you to see if the opportunity is the right fit for them? And a lot of times, folks are just not prepared to have that part of the conversation because they're so worked up thinking like, I got to get this job. I got to land all the right things. I got to say all the right things. The 45-minute interview almost needs to get out the window to meet exactly what you're talking about, Aisha.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I want to talk about something you just said. So talking about allowing for a candidate to ask questions. This is something that I feel very strongly about. Like, one, you need to. I think it's important. Like it's difficult to remember in that scenario where you are a person who maybe doesn't have a job, maybe doesn't like their job, like it for whatever reason, you are looking for a major life change. You have to be able to assess for yourself, like, is this right for me? And it's difficult to do that if you don't have some pretty close connection to the company already. And so being able to use those conversations for that is huge for me. So I personally have a list. I have multiple lists of questions that I ask different people in an organization. I have questions that I'll ask my potential manager. I'll have questions that I'll ask my potential teammates. And I have questions for executives. Like, what are some of the questions that you ask when you're looking for, or do you recommend that people ask, say, if they're newer?
I ask everyone describe the culture at the company to see what it's like at different levels. And if they say, we have a good culture, period, no specifics, anything else, anyone can kind of say that, but I'm looking for a little bit more, and I like to ask the different levels of what they think of the culture. So I do have a separate set of questions that I ask the different specific roles, but I ask everyone about the culture, just like very open-ended question.
Right.
And if the answer is very flat, or you're like, yeah, it's great, then it's kind of a red flag for me.
Right. That's kind of what so with Black Tech Pipeline, so every company on our job board has a landing page, and they have to answer these questions. So it's, what are you building? What problems you're solving? What are your company values? What does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you, and how do you practice each of them separately? What does safety look like? How does leadership participate in the day-to-day? How are they supporting their employees? And then there's asking about the benefits and the pay, because everyone wants to know that. And what is that interview process? What does that look like? Those are things I would ask. I'm like, let me put that out there. The other thing that I think people don't talk about as much is the interview process itself. If you're going to be interviewing at a company, before you go into that interview, it's what should I prepare for? What should I be looking at? What should I be reviewing? What can I expect? Getting as many details as possible so that you're as prepared as possible. And there's nothing wrong with doing that either. I think some people feel scared to ask, but there's no reason to be.
Yeah, I like to lean into the things that feel ugly and uncomfortable. So if I'm talking to someone who is potentially, an individual contributor for an individual contributor sort of role, I'm asking the question, what's the last major headache that you had that was job related? And tell me a little bit about it, right? If I'm talking to someone who's a manager, I'm asking the question, what's the last major conflict that the team has had and how was it handled, right? These are the types of things where, when things are great, everybody's excited. Hey, company's phenomenal. I get paid well. Everyone wants to work together. We collaborate well. When things hit sort of the head, that's when you start to see where people's true personalities come out. And some folks, depending upon how honest they choose to be in the interview process, will sort of determine how comfortably I feel with going forward in the process. Because I continue to think that if I'm interviewing for a company, I also have the right to opt out of that process, and that's okay. And a lot of people don't feel that sense of agency or empowerment. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's harder when you're first starting out. There's the pressure of, I gotta get a job. I gotta make that money. I have to gain some stability for a lot of people. And so you run into Do I wait and wait and wait for the really right thing to come along, or do I take something that I know that I think I can live with? And some people are going to have to make that decision. From the perspective of a hiring manager, when we're talking about some of the questions that we ask, it's been helpful for me to try to dig into what are we trying to get from this question. Because I've been a part of a few processes like what you're describing where we're totally revamping the way that we hire. And in a lot of cases, I've had to ask the question, like, what is the point of this? What are we getting at? Like, what are you hoping that this person says when you ask this question? And if the answer is you're trying to see how they react, like, that's not an appropriate question. Like, you're trying to see how they respond to blah, blah, blah stimulus. No. Like, that's not what this is about. We're not intentionally adding stress to an already incredibly stressful situation. If they speak during the conversation, then we know they can handle stress, like, honestly.
Right.
And so we get really clear about what is the purpose of this? What does it show us? How are we measuring that across multiple conversations? Because we're trying the best of our ability to it's never going to be completely objective, but we are trying to the best of our ability to make this a fair process and evaluate people based on, to the best of our knowledge, our evaluation of how well they're going to work for the team. And I don't mean to say how well they will fit into the team. So I'd love to talk about that a little bit, maybe like how do you go about identifying who is going to add to your team versus how well they're going to fit into your team?
Yeah, from a hiring perspective, and I'm living this right now because I'm trying to hire someone into my team. One of the things that I spend a lot of time on is assessing the ways in which folks differ from the individuals on my team today. Yeah. And a big part of the why there is, sort of to your point, Aisha, culture fit is not it. Culture add is always it. But a lot of folks don't acknowledge that. So the question that I'm always asking is how proactively are we leaning into it versus are we just going to end up here with someone who is going to add to the culture, but in ways you don't want? And so there are very specific sort of cues that I look for to help me assess like what the candidate is not saying and some of the questions I can lean into there to understand a little bit of their personality. I don't always get this right. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a sociologist.
I was going to ask for your list.
Right? And so there are some things that even in my own humane tendencies, right? Like I get things wrong. And this is where I love doing this, not so much by committee, but in a scenario where I'm talking to my boss, who's my VP. I'm talking to the people team who understand this work day in and out. I'm talking to the folks on my team who this person will be working with, who will be their peers, to help balance out all of the perspectives. It's not easy. We don't always get it right, but I think we've got a successful team, so I'm going to say yes.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about hiring, and I kind of want to edge into what happens when we get the job. Like, how do we continue to build in that role? How do we continue to build skills, confidence, so that, because that hiring is a huge barrier, but it's not the only one.
So hiring from the candidates or the hire's perspective? Yeah.
Yeah. How do we continue to grow in that role once we have it?
Yeah. I feel like I really like asking people what their goal is. And it can be like, what is your goal at this company? What is your goal within your career? Like, what are you, at the end of the day, what are you trying to do? And some people have an answer and some people are just like, I'm just here. And for others, it's like, I want to maybe like become director or something like that. And it's like, okay, well, you're at point A, like how do we create that pathway and what is that going to look like? And that's where things like one-on-ones with your manager come in and learning about, how do I get to this level? Like, what does it take to get to this level? What sort of things are you looking for? What sort of things do I need to gain? I feel like you can get so much information out of people by just having a conversation. Like, just talk to them. You want to answer, just talk to people.
Yeah. For each of my direct reports, we talk about long-term career goals, but we have specific personal OKRs, is what we call them, for 6 months. And it's something that's short enough that it's going to be attainable this year, but it's on the pathway to their long-term goal. If they want to be a director, probably not a 6-month thing, but what are the things you can do to kind of get you those baby steps of the way to build up the confidence towards whatever they're working for? And then another way I found that's been helpful for getting newer hires the confidence that, you know what you're doing, is have them be a new hire buddy to someone else.
Yeah.
And then they'll realize, wow, I actually learned a lot. I can teach someone, I can unblock someone. And I think that's just like a great way to get synergy and continue to building up the strength of the team.
That is huge. Being able to participate in someone else's learning is enormous. Like, I say this all the time, and I feel like a broken record, but it's true. Like, being able to teach something, even if you are just like a single step ahead, being able to teach something helps you to solidify your own understanding. When you're forced to articulate it in a lot of different ways, in some cases, to try and communicate it, like that just drives it home so much more clearly, in my experience. And it's one reason that I think community is so important just in general, really. Being able to find that group or groups where you can participate and contribute back. Even if you feel like you don't have the kind of skills or knowledge that it takes, like you do. You have more than someone else in that community, and there is something that you can provide to them, and it's going to help you to progress so much faster.
Yeah, this is where I love social media. And I have a very love-hate relationship with social media. But I am sort of old enough in the industry to remember the days before Twitter and seeing the difference now where people can say, hey, I'm one of the onlys and I need help. Or I had this experience and others chime in, me too. Legitimately, it's transformed the way that people do their careers. And I love that aspect of it. I won't talk about the parts I don't.
It's a whole nother panel.
Different discussion.
See a stream about that later.
Exactly.
But yeah, so kind of touching on that, like how would you recommend that people kind of search for that, whether it's a group, a community to belong to, a mentor, if that's what they're looking for? We can kind of talk about sponsorship as well, which is a different thing, and it's much harder to create for yourself. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my rough take is there's sort of the intrinsic part, which is acknowledging that you feel comfortable enough to say out loud, I need this type of support, or comfortable enough to say out loud, I'm having this type of problem, right? Then sort of the extrinsic is, because it is going to feel uncomfortable, sort of starting with the most comfortable discomfort that you're okay with. Whether that's, I'm going to post on LinkedIn. For some people, it's, I'm going to do this in church because that's where their sense of community is. For some folks, it's, I'm literally just going to get on the phone with a girlfriend. But start in that first place and then just be open to outcome. That's the last part. Like, there's so much of this that is, you don't know what's going to come from that conversation. So as you put it out there, just be open to outcome and see where it takes you. That's my thinking. But the intrinsic part starts first, because so many people get so stuck in the, like, oh man, I don't know if this is just me, or I don't know if I feel comfortable saying this, or I don't know if this is just normal and I'm super new to this. That part is hard to overcome.
Yeah, definitely feeling comfortable, being uncomfortable, and being secure with being insecure, people being vulnerable. I think it's important to have people that represent security for different aspects. Like you have someone who's maybe a mentor or peer in a particular area that's close to your project. But I think it's also really valuable to have someone not related to your project or leadership or performance at all. So I think it's like pulling in from different parts of your aspect, but it does start with being open to the outcome and putting yourself out there.
Asking for what you need. And I know, like you said, it can be difficult, and it starts with yourself first. And sometimes it's just like really putting yourself out there. Like Nike just says, like, just do it. Like sometimes you really do just do it and see what happens, you know?
Yeah. I belong to a community called Nerd Fitness. We can talk, that's also a whole other stream. But one of the sort of mantras is that it's, I think, also taken from a movie, but it's 30 seconds of courage. You take 30 seconds and you can do whatever you can do in that 30 seconds.
Yep.
Like that's enough. That is enough for you to move to the next step.
Yep.
And then you take another 30 seconds and you muster up that courage and you put yourself out there, exactly like you said.
My good friend Will always says, you're only an imposter until you take the first step. And I love that.
Definitely. I love that. You're only an imposter till you take the first step. So I know we're running low on time, and I would love to ask each of you, what is a piece of advice that you would give someone entering the industry now?
I have 2 pieces. I can't do 2 pieces.
That's okay.
Okay, so number 1, I think it's important now, especially with like the economy and job market, you do not have to work at a tech company in order to be considered working in tech. Every company ever, it doesn't matter what they do, it could be a water company, a food company, they have like some sort of presence, an online presence, and you can work there as a technologist. That's totally fine. You don't have to go to the Googles and Apples of the world. Actually blanked on my second piece of advice. Someone else go in there.
That was a really good one piece of advice. We'll see if we get number 2.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Let us know.
Yeah, I'd written this down. I thought about this question before, and I still think this is the right advice, which is, it's hard to make transitions. And I really fundamentally believe there are very few things in life that you can't sort of course correct, right? And so the thing that I think about is, as folks are transitioning, for some, it may be a really exciting experience. For others, it may be a really challenging one. I think that's life, right? Like, stay present in that moment. Stay present in the why these things are happening for you. Learn from that what you need to. Because I think the mantra for me that just resonates is like, life is not supposed to be all highs. Life is not supposed to be all lows. You're supposed to sort of go up and down and learn in the process so that you can recognize the highs and take what you need to from the lows so you can grow and continue to explore and enjoy life. So I would say, like, just choose to be present and take what you need from it, as opposed to, man, I didn't get that job. I'm not doing this no more. Something's wrong with them. Whoa, hold on, wait a minute. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think similar to that ever-evolving journey, my advice would be that tech is always changing and there's no one-way doors.
Yep.
And learning what you don't like, you might be in a situation, you end up, you hate it. That is still really valuable knowledge for you to take your next step. So I feel like there's no like wrong choice that you can make. You might make a choice, not like it in the moment, but then you take that experience and you're able to pick something different next time. So like, yeah, staying present and knowing that tech is like so fluid and you have this skill set that's so transferable to all different
Yep.
types of industries really opens up doors to whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have a final word?
I really can't remember. I'm so sad. I'm so sad. Ugh.
That's okay. I will jump in then, and I will say that I'm going to come back around to my point about community. At least for me, and I know, it can be really difficult for some folks to put themselves out there in this way. I discovered when I met my partner what an extrovert that I am. I had no idea. But I found that it is so important for so many of the reasons that we've talked about throughout the conversation to find even that small group of people who can play those different roles for you as you are progressing through your career. the peer who is there with you, and maybe sometimes there's a rivalry. Maybe sometimes you're like feeding into each other's journeys, whatever kind of works for you. The mentor who is there to say, hey, this is what I have experienced. This is where I think you might want to go because I've seen you do X, Y, Z. And also a coach to say, like, this is how you get from this point to this point. And keeping in mind too that some of those could be paid. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. That is a service that people offer, and they are good at it. And that's potentially you investing in your career. If that's something that you need, that's okay. But finding the people who can help you, who can give you what you need to move forward is so, so important, whoever that may be.
Yeah.
I want to thank you all so much. I really, really appreciated you coming in and talking with me and talking with each other. I'm thrilled to have y'all here, and I'm really, really glad that we can have this conversation for Tech Skills Day. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, this is a privilege and a pleasure, so thank you.
Yeah, this is cool.